Good afternoon, everyone. This is Deborah Wheatman with Careers Done Right. I hope you're doing well. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Charmaine Brown, who is the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion with the Mortgage Bankers Association. Charmaine joins me today to really have a very important conversation about the role diversity, equity, and inclusion plays in the market. Charmaine, thank you so much for speaking with me today and joining me to discuss this incredibly important topic. The first thing I would love
to,
yeah, thank you.
It's my pleasure.
I would love to talk about your perception right now of diversity, equity, and inclusion in 2021. What are you seeing? What are some of your thoughts around how we can, as a society, as business people, be better at incorporating these principles into our everyday lives?
Wow. Well, again, Deborah, thank you for having me today. What a great question. I think that what I'm seeing as a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader gives me great hope. But it also, to some extent, also gives me a little bit of pause, if not concern. On the one hand, COVID has really illuminated for us a lot of the disparities that we have been experiencing in our society, both in business and in the general, marketplace, if you will. But for some reason, I think, thought we were a lot farther along than we actually are. And while I'm inspired by a lot of what I'm seeing, particularly coming from corporate CEOs and community leaders, and all of the courageous conversations that are being held, I also don't want us to get addicted to activities and, become complacent with talking about the problem and not actually doing what it takes to fix the problem. So on the one hand, you start from where you are. I'm very encouraged, but we have a lot of work to do. And I think the idea that when you start seeing more representation, you can relax it's just wrong. I mean, as I said, we've got some fundamental issues that we still need to fix.
So, which brings me to a question regarding rampant discrimination. Why is it, do you think, that we are still experiencing this type of behavior in 2021? Why is this not a thing of the past? Why are we continuing to struggle and see people struggle with being, basically attacked in this way? Why is this continuing to happen? And how, in your opinion, do you think what are the things we can do to make change now and really have it stick?
So people are continuing to be attacked. People are continuing to be killed. I don't want to be dramatic, but it's true. And we have to be able to look at the truth. It's still happening because we looked like we were much further along than we actually were. We looked at progress, and the research and the data is there. When you look at, on the surface level, how minorities and women, people of color, Black, African Americans have progressed, you look at things like the fact that I think Black women have the most degrees than any other population. You look at, the education level generally of low-income people having access to education. But then you start looking at poverty. You start looking at where women are stalling out in careers. And you look at data on the C-suite, and you see that not a whole lot has changed in very fundamental ways. So the conversations around systemic issues and systemic disparities, those are the right conversations to have. Now it's, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And nobody says this when they talk about equity. At least I don't hear it enough. but we're going to have to start using language that mean what we say. When we talk about equity, Deborah, we're talking about power share. We're talking about, when you talk about leveling the playing field, you're talking about people who have generally and historically been marginalized, not just having a seat at the table symbolically, but having a voice in the discussion, having the ability to make some decisions, and having real influence. And that's where we need to focus. That's why we're still seeing a lot of what we see in society and in business. And let me just say, I don't believe that we're not committed. I believe that we are committed. Do we have the courage to do what it takes to really advance and to start dismantling some of these barriers and systems that are affecting our entire society? I tell people all the time, if you really think we're separate, look at COVID. You know, we are really tied together, our fate intertwined, no matter your race, gender, you know, sexual orientation, or any other identity. We truly have a vested interest in ensuring that we're all healthy. And I mean that not in terms of just our health, but healthy in business and community and all of those wonderful things.
Right. So what do you think, what are some things you think we can be doing to bring those conversations to the forefront and allow the voices to be heard, and not just, to your point, sitting at a table, which, right, it's not just about having a presence, but it's about being able to share ideas and really make it where people are coming together like this. Because as we've seen, right, there's a lot of challenge right now, just overall with
Oh,
COVID,
absolutely.
so many things. Having us be a unit and work together will strengthen not only the fabric of the country, but also the fabric of business. How can we make that happen and really make it be meaningful?
I love your questions. I think a couple of things. We all want better outcomes in business, right? So nobody's actually in business not to succeed.
Right.
But we are doing things that are keeping us from the kinds of success that we are capable of. So I would say humanize and not demonize, right? So there are some real issues that we have as human beings. And I know people may be a little tired of hearing unconscious bias, but it is so real. Implicit bias is so real. And the data, Deborah, going back to my earlier point about us not being as far along as we really are, there's data that suggests that most people, when they talk about important issues, are talking about important issues with people who think like they think, right? And then when we get in situations where we don't have data, our brains fill in the blank with what we think we know. So to humanize and not demonize, we say, okay, let's offer grace. What is the learning here? So we all need to be committed to being better at facing and confronting our own internal biases. And then I would say allyship and advocacy. Now, diversity, equity, and inclusion, from my perspective, is a competency-based discipline. A lot of people will say, well, training doesn't really work. I disagree. I think training followed by no action doesn't work. What theory do you know if you never apply it, you can prove it? So I would say focus on confronting your own biases, but then also be an ally and be an advocate. And we can all use our privilege to do that. So when you're in business meetings, when you're in the position of hiring, when you're in the position of promoting and mentoring and sponsoring, look to try to help those who really need the help. It's like the teacher who takes the A student and said, I'm a great teacher, versus the teacher who takes the C student and sees the potential to become an A student. Research, again, I love data, tells us that I think over 70% of sponsors and mentors choose mentees who are just like them. So reaching across and looking for where you can really have impact, using your voice to advocate and to help others to find their voice, I think are some of the things we can do. Doesn't take a lot, right, to do it. It's not like working on the harder systemic issues. But again, we can start from where we are and continue to advance in this area.
So, with that, what are some of the things that you're doing right now to help in your position? Because you're a leader and you have a lot of authority. What are some of the things you're doing? And as a woman of color, you are in a position to advance these initiatives, bring them to the forefront, and really capture what is so important for all of us. What are some of those things that are you doing to make that happen now?
Strategy and culture. Strategy and culture. So the Mortgage Bankers Association, I don't know if I told you this, but this is the first time they've hired somebody to do this job. And I'm so honored to be that person that has the opportunity to advance their efforts. They're doing a lot of terrific work. I am focused on a multi-year strategy that will address things like the wealth and income inequality gap. One of the areas that I'm responsible for leading is supply chain diversity. I need to build that up and build that out. When we talk about wealth, particularly for African Americans, people of color, home ownership is the primary path to wealth. And so I'm in a position to directly impact some of those decisions. But we oftentimes don't necessarily talk about entrepreneurship and giving more business opportunities to people of color, women, African Americans, so on and so forth. So I'm really excited about building that out. And then the other piece that I'm laser focused on, in addition to a multi-year strategy, is cultural competency. You know, Deborah, you probably have heard that marrying out is in. You are seeing more populations marry outside of their identity groups, and that's one of the largest, fastest growing populations, the 2 or more category. We can't approach the way we do business with these communities as business as usual. We're going to have to become more culturally competent, and cultural competency is ranked number 4 of the top 5 competencies for future business leaders. So I'm working to ensure that our business leaders understand why it's important to be culturally competent, and then I'm helping them to upskill. But the multi-year strategy will focus on our own people, how we're recruiting, how we're retaining, how we're advancing. It will focus on our culture. Do we have a sense of belonging in the organization? Disaggregating that data, looking at intersectionality. We can't put all women in one category. We have to understand how intersections matter and where they matter. And then also the business place, the marketplace. Good people skills are good business skills. They're really one and the same. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well, that's a great point. And I think the cultural competence, I would love to talk a little bit more about that because I think that is unbelievably important. You do have inside of an organization just a variety of different people from all different backgrounds, right? And how those groups come, they have to work together, right? Nobody does anything in a vacuum. You have to be able to work together, share ideas. And I believe, and I've always believed, it's the differences that make us stronger together. Those are the things that really make an organization a powerhouse. Because to your point, Charmaine, if you hire in your own image, what do you have? You have the same thing all over again. There's no innovative thought.
That's right.
Versus hiring from different groups, people from different cultures. What do they bring together? A melting pot of ideas, innovation, transformation, things that really can move the needle.
I mean, just exclamation point. Right. No, I absolutely agree with you. But let's talk about why we don't achieve kind of that rich, right? Well, we are all more comfortable and more confident in homogeneous settings. If you're dominant culture, right? If you're dominant white organizational culture minded, why are you inviting me into a meeting where you're going to be uncomfortable, where you're going to choose? In most cases, that's what's happening. We don't talk about it. And that's why we've got to start using the language to say what we mean. You're not going to invite discomfort. But guess what? I have to help you as a DEI leader to understand what else you're not inviting into that room, which is, to your point, the innovation, the creativity, the different perspective that's going to lead you to a better product, that's going to lead you to, if done right, right? It's going to give you the competitive advantage that is sustainable. And I mean, this is the way of the future. And if you're serious about staying in business, you've got to be serious about, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and culturally competent. And the other thing I'd say about that, why I'm starting at MBA with culture, I've prioritized with cultural competency based on what the data is telling us, because that's where the nuance is. You talk about differences, bringing all of, you know, bringing kind of like that secret sauce, right? The nuance is in the cultural differences. If you were to look at me, you would see, most people would say, I'm African American. And you would start applying what you think you know about African American women and what you may know about African American women. But you would miss, unless you really dig in deeper, the fact that I'm foreign born. I'm not American born. And I don't necessarily identify completely with the culture. I embrace, I adopt, I celebrate. But there are important, distinct cultural differences that we miss when we look at surface level identity, and we don't really get to know who's in our workforce, who's on our team. What do they need to know that will help us to build a better product, should we understand that we need to bring them into the conversation and hear their voices authentically, even if it makes us uncomfortable?
So, in your opinion, what are some things that organizations should and could be doing now to create a better understanding, a better presence, and just an overall, a better positioning, right? So they can be in a place to support initiatives that advance all of these things we're talking about. What can these people do right now? What should they start doing? And what should they be thinking about now that will allow them to be successful 5, 10, 15 years into the future? Because as we know, the things that you start to do now, they're seeds, right? It's like planting a tree. The tree takes years and years to grow up.
Metaphor.
So what do you do now to bring those things to the forefront so that you do have an environment that not only says they embrace these principles, because it's one thing to say it, right? You could say anything you want, but really live the principles.
That's just such a rich question. And I love your metaphor about the tree because I often say it's the seed and the soil, right? If you don't have the right environment where everyone can thrive, I don't care how healthy the seed is, right? You recruit great people and they get in your organization and then they stall out, they get stuck, they don't experience a sense of belonging. I always start with data. If you have not, as a leader, done any sort of inclusion diagnostic climate survey that has an engagement and an inclusion index, so you can understand and interpret that data on a disaggregated level, then you need to start there. You need to understand how people are coming into your organization. And again, you're breaking down this data because you need to understand how underrepresented populations are being impacted, right? So how are people coming into your organization? How do they experience the organization, move about the organization? Do you have choke points in your organization? You need the data, you need to analyze it, you need to look at how people exit your organization and also look at that survey data. And then once you have that information, it needs to inform your strategy. You're always going to focus on your people, but I can give you off-the-shelf solutions, but start with your own data and then respond to that data. That's the first thing. And then to your other point is when you talk about walking the talk, your actions have to align with your vision for the organization. If you don't have a vision that involves diversity, equity, and inclusion, you need one. Leaders now need to be fluent in the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Communities are not very patient. Consumers are not very patient anymore and tolerant when you misfire on who you're talking to. You want to reach community X and you think, well, I'll just have pictures. I'll just put people who look like, and you totally miss, again, the nuances. You need to upskill around the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a business leader. And I tell CEOs all the time, if you have not signed the CEO in Action Pledge, you should, because that is a community that will embrace you and that will help you to skill up in an environment that's respectful and safe, where you're with your peers. But Deborah, if I don't emphasize anything else, it's people are not going to be patient anymore with the I just didn't know, because you don't have a reason now not to know.
Right.
You'd have to not want to know. At least that's how it's going to be interpreted.
Mm-hmm. And would you say also that the way companies begin to apply these principles, right, and introduce programs and things, and I'm not even going to use the word policies, because I think a policy is only as good as the people that are going to support its forward momentum. You could say you have a policy, which plenty of companies do.
They do.
But what do they do with them? Right? What do they actually do with them? So if you have a program, you're only going to be as good as your ability to execute on it. Right? You could say you have the best idea for how to drive a culture that embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if you can't implement it, what good is it really?
It's not. It's symbolism without substance. It's, you name it. Execution is key, as is resources, right? Not funding your diversity, equity, and inclusion programs is a key indication or measure of how deeply committed you are or are not. No other business program that you're serious about wouldn't have measures and accountability, wouldn't hold leaders accountable for falling short or exceeding, right? So treat diversity, equity, and inclusion as any other business discipline. I worry, going back to your first question, that it's still largely misunderstood and that there is a sense that you can actually wing it. You can say, hey, I'm all in, and you can announce funding, to charitable organizations, and you can get your communications person to write a great script. But time will really tell whether or not that commitment goes to action and execution, just as you've articulated.
Yeah, and I also think, and tell me what you think about this, that moving forward, right, from this point going forward, the extreme importance of this topic and really being focused on the initiatives that support diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? The programs, the funding, all of these things, they stem from the top. If you have leaders that say they support this and then put nothing behind it, what does that say about the organization? People will remember. And I think, and of course I'm projecting, I don't know for sure, but I believe, and tell me what you think, that these businesses long-term are they destined to thrive unless they really put forth the action behind those words?
I don't think so. I think they could survive, but thriving is a different story. I mean, I could name and cite a lot of headlines from the past year, the past 5 years, of how businesses just kind of got caught being unaware, where leaders may have been overheard saying things that they shouldn't have said, doing things that they shouldn't have done. And some of these companies espoused, great diversity, equity, and inclusion principles, but then expose another problem, which is you may be talking the talk at the top, but if your mid-managers, they don't understand that you mean business, then you have a lot more work to do. So I would say it's possible to survive, but not thrive. The world is changing so rapidly. If you think about where we are today and the idea, I hear people saying we can't wait to go back to normal. Boy, is it never going to be what we thought of as normal. There is maybe a next level of normalcy. I don't know. But the short answer is I don't believe these businesses will thrive. People are going to walk with their pocketbooks. People are evaluating. I mean, think about environmental social governance now and how companies are being, selected for investments based on what they're doing in the community, based on their commitment to our planet. You talk about this triple bottom line, the people, the planet, and profit. That was a conversation we were not having, just a few years ago. And now people are saying, well, now, wait a minute, this socially responsible investing. I don't know that I want to give this company any of my money. Where are my retirement dollars going again? And then you've had CEOs to say, if you don't, diversify your board, we're not going to support, your business. That's not going away. So if you're sitting in the C-suite and you think this too shall pass, no
way.
No way. I had somebody say to me recently, but isn't equity a trend? It was never in my mind
right.
A trend, right? You think equity is about outcomes, but to address it explicitly is something that was long overdue. So
what about the people, because you just pointed out something that I think is really interesting, that they espouse these ideas of diversity, equity, inclusion, our company this, we support this, we have these programs, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, right, they say something which perhaps reveals their true selves. I don't know if it's that or something else.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And what can these people do? Or maybe I don't know, what can they do to correct those things? Because you can't say, well, we have all these programs and we do all these great things and we support these DE&I principles. But by the way, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, open foot, insert mouth, open mouth,
Yeah.
insert foot. Like, what about that? Is there a way to then overcome that? Or are they just perceived as disingenuous?
Yeah, well, so that's a really great question. And I do believe that you should be able to overcome your mistakes. Now, I also said and maintain that people are growing increasingly less forgiving, especially if you've been on the front page and you've been saying all the right things. The immediate reaction oftentimes will be, well, you were insincere. How could you mean it?
Right.
When that happens, you've just set your agenda back, right? You've just tarnished your brand. And what you have to do is accept that and then do the work. And I tell people all the time, I do this work, but I also have to continue to do my own work, right? This is the work of self, in addition to all of the other, kind of strategic and mechanical and tactical things. So that leader has to apologize and mean it, and then show with action what he or she is going to do to repair the damage, because that's another thing, this whole idea that, you know, you can say and do things that don't have systemic implications. There are people who have to live with it. If you say that you believe you can't find any strong Black women to lead in your organization, and you have a platform where people listen to you, believe that bias is going to kick in to some of the people who hear that. And no matter how competent or capable that woman is who shows up, you've got this whole thing going on that says this script, you know, I'm not going to find any because they don't exist.
Which is ridiculous.
So your words matter when you have that platform, when you have that influence, when you have that leadership, and just do the work. That's why I say the CEO in action is phenomenal, because it's not a panacea, but you have a regular cadence of engaging with the other CEOs and diversity leaders in a safe space to do your work. Right? Because you have to. It's not Band-Aid. You cannot show up with a script and think that that's all you need to do.
And I think your point is very well taken. Saying that there are no Black women leaders in an organization, which is completely absurd. That doesn't even make any kind of sense. But what does that statement say, not only to the Black women leaders that would actually consider putting their hat in the ring? What does that say to them?
Absolutely.
And what does it further say to the rest of the organization? It's two messages. It's one, we don't have anybody, even though these people would be very well placed. So it causes them to say, well, they obviously don't perceive me that way, right? And then it sends an even deeper message to the rest of the organization that further sort of squashes that agenda.
Words matter. And words of words with racial implications and power, that combination can do tremendous damage or tremendous healing, depending on how you use it. But you're right, you raise a good point in how it will demoralize and demotivate and further stigmatize. And you can't just change that overnight. You know, you talk about Black women leaders in particular, and I don't remember the last number, but my goodness, the number of Black women CEOs after Ursula Burns, I'm not sure even if we have many, but we don't have enough compared to the population that we could have, right? Those kinds of things, we need to start paying attention to the why, because there are capable women of all hues, right? In this example, I'm talking about Black women, but women in general. And you know, our Latinx and Hispanic sisters and Asian sisters and, you know, multiculturals, you name it. That we're capable of so much more than the numbers bear out. And so the question is why, and then what do we do about it? Well, and LGBTQ sisters, because I know we haven't talked about that, and brothers, right? Because we're all in this together. But yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up LGBTQ, because the Supreme Court last year just made a ruling that prevented people from being fired based on their sexual orientation. Again, in 2021, should we as a society be faced with these long-held biases that just frankly have no place here?
They're not going
never had place, but they have no place anymore.
Anymore. I completely agree. But we're never going to get beyond them if we don't do the work. And I celebrate the Supreme Court decision. Absolutely. I did a town hall a couple of years ago with the American Mortgage Diversity Council, LGBTQ town hall in 5 states. We were focused on housing. And of course, we looked at the employment data as well, and we heard the stories. And it broke my heart to know that the most abused population, at least the outcome from these conversations, were the young people who were coming out and, were kicked out of their homes,
Right.
or suffered verbal and physical abuse. So I celebrate our progress, but I also think about the pieces where it may not affect our workforce directly. So let's say we're hiring and we have a goal around hiring LGBTQ and supporting and promoting and all of that. That's great. But there are people who are in your workforce that may not be of that identity group, but they have people in the family. So how do you support the whole ecosystem? Because one of the things we did at Fannie Mae, which was one of my most proud moments ever in life, was a town hall with Judy Shepard, Matthew Shepard's mom. And I remember in that town hall, one of our trans employees stood up and, had this wonderful conversation and acknowledged that he was trans. And I just sat in the back of the auditorium and I thought, this is worth everything that I and the team did to get this event, right? This is worth it. When people can say unabashedly, this is who I am. But until we normalize, just think about all the commercials you see. How many of them are same-sex couples? Just think about the reaction same-sex couples still have if they just walk the street and express their affection the way any other couple would, right? So we have the work to do. I agree with you, it has no place. But here's the thing, Deborah, and this is hard. Moral diversity, right? Most people can wrap their heads around identity, diversity, representation. But when you've been grounded in a philosophy and a belief that's core to your identity, that rights you and wrongs me, that's not going to be an easy thing for you or me when we are now together in this workforce. And I don't care which one of us is the boss, right?
Right.
That's going to be a tough relationship if nobody helps us. And the last thing I'll say, I was on this radio show with a minister. It was very nice. He was a minister, right?
Right.
So he was coming from a place of faith. And while I have my own faith, when I do this work, I have to come from a place of accountability. Mm-hmm. So I can't legislate your heart. I can't mandate your heart. I can't tell you that I think you should or whatever. But what I can say is this company values this thing. And in order for you to be a part of this company, we need shared values here. And there are expectations and behaviors that we have for you, Deborah, to work in this company. So we can be really clear. Because again, we can't, I loved the minister coming from a place of faith, but in business, we got to hold people accountable.
Right. So it really becomes a question of, right, sharing the ideas, promoting them throughout the organization, and serving really as an educator and having ongoing conversations to make sure people understand these are our values as a company.
I love that.
To work here, this is part of our mission. It's part of our vision. It's part of our value system as an organization. And we want people within these walls, within these halls, that also embrace these ideas. And people from different cultures, from different backgrounds, different skin hues, all of us can come together, work together, and do better.
Absolutely. I just think that's so beautifully put. I mean, that's it. I can't add to that.
Well,
that's beautiful.
Thank you. And Charmaine, I would really like to thank you for spending this 45 minutes with me to discuss something that really I personally embrace, professionally embrace. And I think it is so important. And I'm just thankful that I have someone like you to speak to about these things. And I would
Pleasure was all
really
mine.
love to thank you. This is Charmaine Brown. She is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Mortgage Bankers Association. Thank you. They are very lucky to have you. And
No, thank
I
you.
appreciate you so much. And thank you so much.
Likewise. Take good care.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.